so many times we're running with our head down towards a goal, failing to realize that during this time, we could also be living an amazing life that we're also going to step into in retirement. And so this is where it's all about having different options.
Hey, how's it going, Nick?
Doing well, Scott. How about yourself?
I'm good. Ready for another episode.
Yeah, we got a listener question today. I think we just jump right on in.
Woohoo! We love listener questions because, we think we know what you need to hear, but it's amazing to get feedback from you on the questions that you're contemplating. If you would like to submit a question, just go to realpersonalfinance.co and you can submit a question. Okay, so today's question comes out and it says, hey, I'm 41 and have 95,000 across my retirement accounts with 23,000 in Roth. I started the retirement game late due to advanced schooling, low salaries, and general ignorance. I'm currently making 100,000 a year and trying to catch up. Maxing out a traditional 401k, $23,500 with a 3% match, maxing a Roth IRA, and investing another $20,000 per year in a brokerage account. I have a $40,000 emergency fund, 1 year for comfort, getting 4.1% in a high yield savings account, and $140,000 in a brokerage. Is the traditional 401k the correct approach, or to have more capital to invest now? I feel it makes sense when trying to catch up and is somewhat balanced by the Roth IRA. Also, while knowing it's not optimal in taxable accounts, I prefer dividend ETFs from an emotional standpoint to get capital to invest without selling shares. What percentage should I aim to have in growth? Any tips to getting over the emotional blocker that steers me to dividend funds instead? Enjoy the show and appreciate any insight you may offer. We are happy to offer some insight.
Yeah.
Let's start. Well, how about we start with a recap of where they're at, Nick? What do you think?
I like that. Yeah, this is a great question. This is a lot of good information that helps us put together a good episode, because the more information we have, the better, I would say guidance and material that we could provide. So we're not having to kind of, guess or, expand creative liberties here. So 41 years old, just got out of grad school, it sounds like. Let's look at what we have saved and accumulated so far on the retirement and investment side. So Roth IRA, 23,000, 401k, about 72, brokerage, which is our taxable account, about 140. That's awesome. And then another 40 in the emergency fund, which you said is 1 year worth of quote unquote comfort, or we'll call it living expenses. So
yeah,
across the board, we're going to exclude just savings for a second. Investable assets, we're already north of 200,000, I think 235,000.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so when I look at this, my first question, this is where it comes to the intersection of, financial planning and personal living and, your alignment, is like finance being more personal than it is financial. When we say we're behind, I would first challenge against who?
Right.
Right. And so we could work backwards in figuring out, okay, how long do you want to continue to work for? It looks like you keep your savings rate or what you're living off of pretty low, which is great. And so we'll unpack a couple of the questions here, but
yeah,
looking at this so far, I think you're off to a really good start. I'd say you're being maybe a little hard on yourself, but we need to figure out what our goal is.
Oh, totally agree with that. I think that, this is when you submit a question, of course, you can say things like I'm behind and I feel behind, because that's how you feel. And of course, say how you feel, but no blame, no shame here. You are where you are. And in all honesty, to this listener, because you're at a point where in life where you're spending about $40,000 a year, you have almost 6 years saved into retirement.
That's a good way to look at that. I like that.
So if you just take the total amount you have invested in investment accounts and divide by the amount you need to live, you have 5.875 years of assets, which is really good for someone in their 40s. So I actually wouldn't say you're behind at all.
Not at all. Not at all. I always love to get really nerdy and say, okay, well, that's 5.8 years, not even including growth. Like, what if this person never invested another dollar, 20 years from now, what would that grow to? Right? Of course, we know that's not the case, because when we break this down, this person looks like they're saving almost half of their take-home income, which is wild.
Yep, absolutely. Now, the question that they pose first is saving to the 401k correct? And what that says to me as they're asking the question is saving to the pre-tax 401k correct? Because you can also just go save 23,500 to the Roth 401k as well, if you'd like, right? Like, that's very easy to do instead. And based on, I don't know, I'll be interested in your opinion, Nick, but the way I look at it is I always want to go look at, okay, what tax rate are you in right now? And I'm making the assumption that this person's a single filer, because they didn't mention a loved one. So if we're a joint filing, it's even more obvious. But right, for a single filer making $100,000 a year, saving that $23,500 to the 401k, they're probably sitting in right now in the 22% tax bracket federally. It's probably where they're sitting. Even if they were to flip and go save it all to Roth and not get that deduction on the 23,500, they would still be in the 22% tax bracket. Okay. And for that reason, when people are in those lower brackets in life, I love to see them save more to Roth than to pre-tax.
In the same camp, the 24% tax bracket, so the next one up, is I think where we start to kind of go either or. I'm still a fan in between that 22 and 24 of going Roth as well. So I'm totally in alignment there. And once we get north of that, I believe the next bracket from 24 is 32.
Right.
Based off current legislation. And then I think it goes maybe one more higher at
35 and then 37.
Yeah. And so once we start to get north of there, let's back up and actually break down why that would make sense. So for our listeners that are in that 22 to 24, anything below that, right, it makes sense to go towards the Roth, because the deduction that we would get by choosing to go into like a pre-tax 401k isn't going to be as valuable from a, I'd say, deduction or credit standpoint on our tax return, and lowering our income as if we were in a higher tax bracket. So when we're in those higher tax brackets, 32, 35, 37, we get a much larger, I'd say, dollar for dollar deduction when we contribute to a 401k. And so there's a way of looking at it today. And then we could even take this further and say, looking at this 20 years from now for this listener, is it better to save in a lower tax bracket today, or where are they going to be in retirement?
And, if you want to make it really, really simple, guys, because sometimes you're trying to remember, what's the difference between Roth and regular? If we just say that you have $1,000 to invest today and the tax rate is 10%, well, there's two options, right? So Nick can go ahead and take his $1,000, just invest it today, not pay taxes. And between now and the next 20 years, I'm just going to say it's going to 10x in value. So it's going to be worth 10 grand in the future. The tax rate, if it's still the same, 10 grand, he's going to take his 10 grand out. He's going to pay $1,000 in tax. 10% of 10,000 is $1,000, and he's going to get to keep 9,000. Right. Well, I, on the other hand, being in thinking that the Roth is a better option, and at my 10%, investment, I'm going to put my $1,000 in today, but I'm going to pay 10% today. So I'm going to pay $100 today on my 1,000. I'm going to invest 900, and I'm going to let it 10x to the future date. And when I pull it out, I'm also going to have $9,000. So if the tax rate doesn't change, it doesn't matter which one you choose. But that's why when we look with clients and we go hey, you're in a lower tax bracket this year, let's choose the Roth, because chances are you're going to be in higher tax brackets in the future. right? And then if you're in a really high tax bracket today, we say, hey, let's defer taxes because chances are we might be able to be in a lower tax bracket in the future. And that's really all that this is. But to your point, yeah, flipping more to Roth, I think makes a lot of sense for this listener. And then as you pointed out, as we get to that 24% bracket, we might want to split or choose to do some more to Roth and some more to pre-tax. You can absolutely do that in your 401k or 403b at work, right? Totally a legitimate thing to do. But keep saving to that Roth IRA and keep contributing to the brokerage account.
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing on that too. If we make the switch from pre-tax 401k to Roth 401k, one thing, for our listeners that you're really going to have to pay attention to when you get your next paycheck and you've reached out to HR and you made that switch, don't freak out when your paycheck is smaller, because now when you're making that same dollar amount contribution into that 401k, it's coming after all your taxes have been withheld. So you're contributing 10, 15%. You're contributing that amount on a smaller number now. And so all of a sudden your take home pay, because it's already been taxed, right? It doesn't come out beforehand like the pre-tax. It's a smaller take home. So I always like to say, give it 1 or 2 paychecks, see how it feels. And then let's have a conversation. Let's see if we need to make any adjustments. To Scott's point, maybe the next best starting point is to go a little hybrid approach, half into the pre-tax, half into the Roth.
And for your, the way that you're explaining totally makes sense. And in this listener's point of view, they should have plenty of room since they're saving to the Roth, maxing the Roth IRA, and also putting 20,000 in the brokerage account, should have plenty of room to adjust for that. But to your point, if we're kind of like really tight on our savings amount, right? And we're going to get to savings for this gentleman next. But if we're tight on savings amount, to your point, we got to be mindful of that. So that's a really good point. And I think that's where we should go next, actually, is just looking at the savings rate. Yeah, the savings rate, general ignorance aside, which is, man, did they ramp up their savings rate? Because they are saving $23,500 to the 401k, $20,000 to the brokerage account, $7,000 to a Roth IRA if they said they're maxing it out, and then they get a $3,000 employer contribution, to the 401k. So in total, that's $53,500, $50,500 of their own money. So basically, they're saving over 50% of their income.
That's a lot. That's
a lot.
A lot. And, and each person's different, right? And so this is where, hey, if we have a target in mind and we want to run full steam ahead, fantastic. Never going to discourage from over saving or saving at a rate like this. It's a lot easier to have these type of questions than when we have our conversations rather than someone who's saving 5% of their income.
Right? Absolutely.
And so where I would start is just, you're 41 today. You've accumulated about, we'll call it $230,000. Your saving rate's north of 50%, which is phenomenal. I would just say, what are we sprinting towards? Is it retirement by 50, by 60? You've already mentioned in the comments here that you're living off of about $40,000 a year. But I think that's probably the next place we should go.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing I look at immediately is I would start having questions of like, I would just want to know, are you living the life that you feel really fulfilled in? Or are you over saving to the detriment of living a great life today because you feel you're behind? Right? Because if we just look at the basic math, if we just say that 235,000 is that where we start today, we're going to save, let's see, 235,000, and we're going to save 53,500 a year.
Okay.
And we're going to save let's just say we're going to save for 19 years until we're 60. Right.
Yep.
And let's just be really basic and say we get a 7% rate of return on our investments. That means at age 60, you're going to have $2.85 million. Right. If I just say what can that sustain for a lifestyle? If we just do like the old simple Guyton guardrail, that supports about $9,500 a month.
That's more than double off what they're living off today.
Right. And it's like, if we look at, well, what do they really need?
Mm-hmm.
If we're really at 40,000 a year, we really need to get a portfolio to somewhere around probably like 1.5 million to sustain that life. If this is the amazing life that you're living today, that'd be my main question, is like, what are the things you want to do in life? Because as we get older, there's our health fades, like our time to do things. In a sense, we might get more time, but we need to have health, money, and time to go do things.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what are the things you want to be doing in life while you're growing, while you're running your career? And let's make sure those things are planned for and they're built in. And if the 40K is really just the foundation of what we need, but it's not everything we need, let's plan for those things. Because as we can see here, you could probably retire in something like 10 or 11 years if you save at this rate.
Absolutely.
If that's what you want. But is that what you want?
Yeah. I mean, I even did a simple exercise where I chopped $20,000 off their saving rate, and it still got them 19 years from now using the same variables that you plugged in, Scott, at 1.9 million, which, using safe, sustainable distribution rates, still at 1.9 gets them almost to $90,000 a year. And so, retirement isn't this pie in the sky. When I hit this number, then I'll start living my life. Like, what is the point of sprinting there and being miserable along the way? Not saying you are, but so many times we're running with our head down towards a goal, failing to realize that during this time, we could also be living an amazing life that we're also going to step into in retirement. And so this is where it's all about having different options. I'm guilty, just as I'm sure a lot of people are, of crash diets from time to time. And, I'll throw out everything in my house and say, okay, it starts on Monday. And then probably like 2 weeks later, if I'm probably giving myself a lot more credit there, probably a week later, we're back at the store buying the same old things. And it's like, oh man, like, what does it look like to have kind of balance along the way?
Right.
That's the same thing here.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that kind of nails that question for us. Like, are we saving too much? To me, looking at this, I would really want to understand, what does an amazing life look like? And let's map some cash flows to make sure that we are really living that great life. And if you already are, that's amazing. Yeah. Kudos to you. And if you're not, I just don't want to see you cutting to the bone to play catch up and not enjoying life today, because the retirement's not promised. Nothing in life is promised. So let's make sure we live a great life today and prepare for our future. Yeah. The next question was kind of about dividends and really preferring dividend exchange traded funds. ETFs just means exchange traded funds. Mutual funds are kind of interchangeable with exchange traded funds. You can find dividend funds anywhere. So they like to have capital to invest without selling shares. Let's just chat through that a little bit. And then they're asking, what percentage should I aim to have in growth? And I think we could look at that through the lens of, maybe we'll look at the lens of that through just general allocation. Yeah.
Yeah. We get this one a lot commonly, especially when we start to toggle or flip the switch to retirement. There's a whole camp out there similar to different camps, whether it's like index fund and passive investors versus active investors. Dividends tends to fall in another camp as well, which is, if we have ETFs or different funds or even companies that are paying a consistent dividend and rewarding shareholders, well, then that means we don't have to take our money out because, well, we're getting paid to own these particular funds. And so I think they serve a role and a purpose. They fit into a portfolio, but one thing we also want to be careful of is, well, let's not get too overly concentrated to one thing, one asset class or sub-asset class and category, that we miss the rest of the market. And so we'll dive into where growth fits in and what have you. But I completely understand the emotional tie of that, of, well, now I don't have to take as much out as a distribution, and I have these good quality, stable companies that are paying me.
I'm going to take a slightly different angle to it. So when a company pays a dividend, and a lot of people don't realize this, so that's why it's worth noting. Let's say, I'm just going to say like a Home Depot, I know they pay a dividend, or like AT&T, they pay a dividend.
That's a great one. Yep.
So they're going to have some share price. And let's just say the share price is $100 a share, and they're going to pay a $2 dividend. Well, nothing else happening, no market movement of buying and selling, the supply and demand and all the news of what's happening with that stock. If nothing else happens, and I have $100 company, and I get a $2 dividend, the very next day, the share price is $98.
What?
Mm-hmm.
How could that be?
Yeah. Because what's happening is the company is taking their balance sheet, which is part of where the valuation of the firm comes from. What's the value of all the assets, and the future growth is what kind of drives or falls with the value of the company as well. But when they take that cash and they pay it to me, the value of the stock goes down by the amount that's paid out. It's that simple.
You know, I'll also say, just adding to that, you know, when we look at, we could say, analyzing companies or stocks, dividends are just one way the CEO or the board of a company can choose what to do with their cash, right? Oftentimes there's other ways that CEOs and board members can say, we're actually going to take it in a slightly different direction. We're going to buy back more of our own company share. And what happens in that case? Stock price goes up.
Yeah, so it's harder to comprehend perhaps, but just think of it this way: the same company's worth $100, and it's $100 times the number of shares that exist in the open market, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So if I take, as the CEO or the CFO, that same number of dollars that I was going to put into a dividend, and instead I go to the market and I say, I'm just going to buy up this number of shares, I reduced the number of shares available in the market, and nothing else changed. So what happens is the value of the stock goes up. It's a more efficient way to deal with like share buybacks and dividends. I would much rather see a corporation doing share buybacks than paying dividends.
And then there's a third way that we haven't even really talked about, and this actually leans more towards growth-oriented companies. Rather than using it to buy up their own shares or issue a dividend, sometimes they use that cash and they say, we're just going to redeploy it back into growing our company. So we're going to hire more. We're going to expand operations. And instead of paying that dividend, they now, this doesn't always work this way, but traditionally when we look at growth companies, they're going to see more growth, which is going to show up in the form of the stock price going up.
Yep. So the answer I would give back to the listener is, I would prefer to be in control of when I have choose to be taxed in my brokerage account.
Yep.
Now, I still own, to be clear, funds that pay dividends, but I don't target funds that just pay dividends.
There we go.
I want to own the entire globe of stocks, the entire world. And then there's many ways you can look at that to do that, but I want a full basket of investments. And I want that because I don't know if Toyota is going to do better than Ford this year. So I want a Japanese market and a US market. And then I also want an Italian market where like, that's Fiat Chrysler. Right. So like, I want that as well. So I want to own everything. And then I'll take the qualified dividend so long as I can get it. That's lovely. But then I'll just have slices. And we've talked about this on the show before, of the US market, the international market, the emerging market. And then I'll put a tolerance band on it of say like 10% or 20%. And I'll just look and see, do I need to sell? Has the US done so well that it's time to sell some and go buy into the other two? Right. That is a more efficient way, and it'll probably help you grow portfolio over the long run in a more efficient manner than just targeting dividend stocks.
Because the other thing that we haven't really talked about here is like growth rates, and this person being in their 40s and what type of growth rate they're targeting. Because if we look at traditional dividend funds, they tend to be more value-based, and they don't grow at the same rate from an appreciation or a performance standpoint than, say, companies that are more growth oriented. And so this is where it comes back. And I know this is splitting hairs just slightly, but what is our goal? Is it retirement at 50 or is it at 60? And what's a growth rate that we could factor into to help get to that goal? And then how do we build a portfolio that supports that?
Sure. I mean, but if we just look at it really simplistically, to your point, like if I own Palmolive, right, which is a company you can buy, you're buying the soaps that you buy at the grocery store.
Yep.
Right. Not a very highly innovative space, but a really quality space.
All needed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then there's a number of others you can get at the grocery store. Like you need paper towels, right? Like we need all of those things, and that's great. And then there are, of course, growth companies as well. And my answer would be you want both. You don't just want the value only, or you don't just want the growth only. You want both. And then you can ask questions like, do I want to tilt a little bit more to value than growth? Do I want a little bit more small than large? Like you get to kind of figure out what do you want, or you can work with an advisor to help with that. But that's the view I would look at. But overall allocation for this particular listener in their 40s with a year of emergency fund, unless they have a big major thing coming up for them, I think leaning more to an all equity allocation or a near all equity allocation would make a lot of sense. Of course, if they're saving for a big purchase in the short term in that brokerage account, that would change things. But when you're not going to touch your retirement accounts for 30 plus years, being invested pretty much across the board in stocks makes a ton of sense. You just want time for those investments to compound.
Oh, time is such a big aspect of them, often overlooked. And, we haven't even talked about the role, whether it's dividends in retirement play, but, my mind goes to, well, once you're in your 60s, there's something else that produces income, and that's called bonds. And so we don't have to get into that today, but your portfolio in your 40s is going to look different than it probably most likely will in your 60s and 70s. And it doesn't need to just be generated from dividends to provide that income. There could be other shifts, like moving more into bonds as we get older. And there's different ways to provide that income and stability.
Yeah, I think the last thing that I would end with is one of the things that we'll do at the firm is that for whether it's a retiree client who does have dividends and interest from bonds, or it's just a younger client who has mainly dividend income coming through the equities side of things, we will make it so that all of those dividends will pay to cash in the portfolio, which is what a listener was alluding to. So they have the ability to go buy other things. That makes a ton of sense because that helps you with rebalancing. So you don't have to do it as often. But even still, if you have to go change something, you should be getting a qualified rate to do so. You're going to be in the 15% bracket based on where you're at. So I think that you're doing a lot of good things, and just keep it up.
Yeah. This was like a great comment, great listener question. Please keep them coming. We love this. Scott alluded to at the beginning of the episode here. Sometimes we'll get lost into what we want the next podcast episode to be, and comments like this really drive the show. So it makes us happy when we get them. Keep them coming in, and great all-around question. Hope we answered your question for you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time, and we'll see you guys soon.
Take care.
Bye, Nick.
See you, Scott.